my mom said, she said, so what do you guys think about your father's death? Like it's been 3 weeks now. Like, what are you guys thinking? And, I remember specifically, I said to my mom, I think that if Dad knew how much good is going to come from this, he would be okay with dying.
Rob, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
I'm honored and grateful to have you here for your esteemed podcast journey that you've been on. And I'm excited to dive into you and your story here today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here, man.
So I was thinking about the place to start this conversation, frame it. And I figured a good place would be with your parents thinking that you were fake crying when you were a little kid.
Yeah. Yeah. You want me to talk about it? So it's actually a good question. And so you have done your research, I can tell. But there's one thing, it was my mom and my sister is what it was. So it's you got one of my parents. My dad wasn't there at this point. He was already out. I think so for me, it's like I don't like being called a motivational speaker because I'm not trying to motivate people. What I really want to do is I want people to like understand who they are, why they are the way that they are. And, I remember there was one time when I was probably thinking back to the house we were in, I was probably 9. And we had this house, it was 2 bedrooms. And at this point in time, I had never had a bedroom of my own. It was always me sleeping on the couch. So it was my parents had one room. And it was before we moved out, before my parents got divorced. My sister had her room because she was 6 years older than me. So she's like 15. So 15-year-old girl doesn't want to share a room with her, 9-year-old brother at the time. And I don't know what happened, but I remember specifically I was sitting there and I said something and I started getting like emotional, like a 9-year-old boy would get emotional, right? And I remember getting emotional and they were, I don't want to say making fun of me, but they were kind of like calling me out as if I was fake crying and fake emotions. And I remember running into my sister's room. She had two beds. I went into the one that was on the right and I put my face down. I remember like crying and being like, I'm not faking this. Like, why don't they see this? Why don't they accept it? I remember being like a little kid being like, they're just not, is there something wrong with my emotions? Is there something wrong with this? And the reason why I bring that up is, and why I'm glad you brought it up actually, is because I think a lot of times there's events that happen in our life that make us disconnect and make us who we really are. And I think over time, that was probably one of the first breaks that I had of being like, my emotions don't matter. Like what I think doesn't matter and how I feel doesn't matter. And I think from there, I started to kind of bury my emotions. And, I think a lot of people, we throw our emotions off to the side and they're like over here. And we just like look over in this direction. Our emotions are over to the right for people who can't see me. And over to the left, we like look to the left and be like, no, this thing over to the right is not there. And I got older and I realized like I wasn't good with my emotions. I didn't understand why I wasn't good with my emotions. And then I thought back and I was like, well, what are my emotions like as a kid? And it took me a while. And then just one day I was like, oh, I remember one time when I was really emotional about something that happened and my mom and my sister just wouldn't, they were just calling me out. They thought that I was lying to them. They thought that I was just trying to get attention. And I think it just kind of set me up to start to break away from like my emotions don't matter. They're not relevant. So therefore I should just push them away. And I think a lot of people have those moments in their life that some of them they can recall, but it's probably a lot of them we can't recall. And they just kind of make us who we are. And over time, I just started realizing like, okay, my emotions are here for a reason. I've got them for a reason. I don't know why I don't accept them. I don't know why I run from them. I don't know why I try to keep myself so busy on Instagram or drinking or smoking cigarettes or whatever it is. And I think that for a lot of people, it's going back and being like, what happened in my past that made me who I am? And sometimes being over emotional is how some people get attention as a child. And so then they're really emotional as an adult and they don't understand why. Or sometimes it's getting angry is what gets them the attention that they wanted. And so they learn, same way that you like train a dog. It's like we've trained ourselves in certain ways to get attention or to be like, you know what, my emotions aren't okay and I should just throw them away. And I think that's kind of what happened with me in that situation.
Someone hears that. How would you recommend them start to find those patterns of where am I holding on to emotions? What are the stories that are shaping my life?
Well, I think it comes back to like I just did an episode on this last week. And what I talk about is the difference between like self-awareness and self-consciousness. And I've been asked many times, like podcast episodes, like, oh, if you had a superpower, or if you could give everyone a superpower, what would it be? And mine is like extreme self-awareness. And like, if everybody in this world was self-aware, this world would be perfect, because we don't think about how our actions affect other people, how other people's actions affect us. And if we can build self-awareness, I think that's really important. Sometimes what happens when someone goes on a personal development journey, though, is their self-awareness turns to self-consciousness. And I always say, like, everyone says ignorance is bliss. Sometimes it's easier just to be completely ignorant of who we are and how we affect the people around us, and the people around us, how they affect us. But once you start getting into personal development, you can start to become aware of places that you need to improve. But then we start thinking too much about it, and then we become very self-conscious. And that can mean that we actually disconnect from other people. And so for me, the thing I always go back to, and I preach it, I feel like almost every single podcast episode, is journaling, like actually writing down and becoming self-aware. Why do I feel this way? And so, for me, it was like that. The only way I remember that memory is by sitting there and journaling through, why am I this way? So I remember, like my girlfriend at the time, when I remember this, she's now my wife, I was not really open to emotions. And she has two parents that are still married, and they're great. She has a great relationship with her parents and a great relationship with her sisters. And me, I have the exact opposite of that, of just like alcoholic father. My mom, I don't think, and she would admit it too, is not real great with her emotions and communicating her emotions. And so for me, I was like, why is she so open and why am I so closed off? And I was like, and I started journaling through. I was like, what's wrong with my emotions? When did I learn like my emotions were bad? And I think that for anybody else that's out there and they're like, well, I feel the same way, I think that literally taking and putting on a piece of paper is the easiest way to do it. Because, if I were to give anybody listening a math problem of like 2 + 2, everyone would be like, oh, it's 4. But if I said 4,896 plus 96,302, you're probably going to be able to figure out if you have pen and paper, right? Because it's more of a complex problem. It's not hard, but it's a little bit more complex. But if you think about like every conversations you've ever had, every person you've ever been interacted with, the mimicking we do of our parents and society and all that stuff, it's like we're so much more complex than that math problem. And most people try to keep it all in their head. And I think that when you can put it on paper, you can start to figure yourself out. When you can start to figure yourself out, then you can take that piece of paper and plan how to get yourself to be different, open up a little bit more, what things you want to improve upon. And so for me, I always say like, easiest thing is pen and paper, and just ask yourself questions. Why am I this way? Why am I closed off to my emotions? Why am I so angry? Why am I so emotional? Why do I not trust this person? And then actually like ask yourself the question and force yourself to find the answer to it.
When you look back at your own story, were there any moments where you could have leaned into journaling, leaned into your emotions more, and that would have had a crazy impact on your life when you were suppressing your emotions?
Yeah, like my entire life. Yeah. I think but I didn't have that awareness when I was younger, right? I was lucky enough. I was interviewed last week, and the guy was like 6 years old on his podcast. He's like, man, I can't believe you're only 37. You have so much time. And I was like, I was just lucky enough to have trauma when I was younger. And I was lucky enough to find a company that pushed personal development. And they were really hardcore on personal development and working on yourself and, hiring a coach if you wanted to. And so for me, I hired a coach that helped me out through it. Hired a few coaches over my lifetime. And I've invested more money into my personal development than almost anything else that I've put it into, because it's the one thing that I think has the best ROI. But there were definitely moments in relationships before my wife where like I screwed them up royally, and it's like if I think back to like, all right, my very first girlfriend, where she was like, she felt like I remember we had a conversation around like me not opening up. And I was like, I don't even know what opening up means. Right. And so it's like, I never had a pen and paper and wrote those things down. And so, so then that turned into other things where she, I thought I was giving her what she wanted, but then I wasn't necessarily giving her what she wanted. So then she went out to other places to try to find what she wanted. She cheated on me. And it's like, that could have probably I could have probably figured out if I would have had a pen and paper, but I don't see anything ever happening as anything that ever happens to me as a mistake. And it was supposed to happen exactly the way that it was, because it wouldn't have brought me to start to go, well, okay, I ruined that relationship. I ruined another relationship. We both kind of ruined this relationship. And then you get into one, you're like, well, I actually really like this person. I want to stay in a relationship with them. I'm looking at all the ways that I've screwed up in the past. 50% of that is me. 50% of it is the other person. And the way that I act or around them is going to dictate the way that they act a lot of times as well. And so I think that if I were just to if anyone's out there and they're 17 years old, just start journaling. Put all of your thoughts on a piece of paper, whether it's good, whether it's bad, whether it's you're stressed out, whether it's you're angry, whether it's you're sad, and just ask yourself, like, where does this come from? Is I think the best thing for people to do. And for me, I think that would have helped me a lot to be able to just take a step back and be like, well, why did my girlfriend say that? Is it possible that I'm not open up as much? And so, I'm 37 now. That was 20 years ago. And so it's like, could I have done better? Absolutely. But for me now, like what I try to do is try to put everything on paper.
Yeah. So it's funny you mentioned your 17-year-old self, because I was talking to one of my friends who's a 17-year-old kid, and it's great to be able to talk to him. And he grew up in very similar circumstances that I grew up in, so I can understand where he's coming from. And the one advice that I gave him last night was just to start meditating. And if you think about journaling's like meditation just on paper.
For sure.
And I'm curious, if you were having that conversation, I guess, with the 17-year-old kid, you don't know him, but let's say it's me in this situation. What are the 1 to 3 things other than journaling that you would recommend for him to become the best version of himself?
Well, I do think meditation is probably the most important thing besides journaling that people can do. And that was actually funny enough. I only gave 2 tips in the self-awareness episode to not turn into self-consciousness, and it was journaling and meditation. And I was like, I don't know if there's any other practice that's really needed besides that, right?
Yeah.
Because really, what both of those are for. I remember I was in Thailand in 2017, and we were in this place called Chiang Mai, and there was an opportunity where you could spend a day with a monk. And I was like, that sounds awesome. I want to spend a day with a monk. Like I remember being a little kid and getting books on monks, and I was like, man, I could become a monk. I remember being in high school and being like, I could be a monk. Like that seems like something that would be fun to do.
Yeah.
And so the thing that I did though is I had a day with him, and we sat down, and when he was talking about meditating, the very first thing to do is meditate. And he's like, most people think that they're terrible at meditating because they can't get their mind to stop. But the point of meditation is not to get your mind to stop. The point of meditation is to observe your thoughts. And that's also the exact same thing that I think journaling is to observe them and put them down. And so when people sit down and they sit there and they're like, I meditated this morning, and I was like, my brain was kind of going crazy, and I was like, okay, I've got breathing techniques to kind of calm myself down. So I calmed myself down. I started like just allowing things to come up. It gives you a space to just sit and be with yourself. Both of those 2 things allow you time to just sit and be with yourself. Like I could say working out does it as well, sure, but there's sometimes when I work out and I'm blasting music because I want to get into it, But I think that if people could just have more space dedicated for themselves and not more space on Instagram or social media, and really start to rediscover who they are, I think is the most important thing. So I don't even think it's 2 or 3 tips. I think that if people just journaled and meditated and started observing their thoughts, and I always say, like, when you're in the jar, you can't read the label. What that means, like when you're inside of your own head, it's really hard to figure out what's going on. But if you take yourself out of your head and you look at it and you say, okay, I'm going to look at this not subjectively, objectively, and say, what's going on with this person? Like, he's been really stressed out recently. Okay, why has he been so stressed out? Or she's been really emotional recently. Why has she been so emotional? And meditation gives you a chance to kind of sit and observe what's going on in your thoughts. Because people who think they're bad at meditation are just observing how their normal state of being is all the time outside of meditation. And so if someone sits down, they're like really stressed out during meditation, it's like, well, is that stress there outside of meditation? And so for me, I think those are the 2 things that I would really focus on for people. And you're going to be bad at it for a while. I'm still bad at it. I started really meditating when I was in 2009. So we're at 14 years.
Wow.
I've been to 10-day silent meditation retreats, and I still feel like I suck at it. Like I still feel like I'm not that good. But it's only because of the fact that I'm like, well, how could I do better? How can I improve this? It's not really about that. It's really just like, all right, let me give myself some space to just observe myself, to observe my thoughts, to observe who I am. And then from there, what do I like and what do I not like? What would I like to strengthen in myself? What would I like to weaken? And then from there, just make some assessment of where you are, and then plans to just kind of get past it.
What did you learn from the 10-day silent meditation retreat?
Oh man, it was really interesting. So 10-day silent meditation retreat, it's called Vipassana. And so I did Vipassana, and it's really interesting because not only is it a silent meditation retreat, but you're also not allowed to look people in the eyes because you don't realize how much you actually communicate with your eyes. So there's no looking in the eyes. So you're walking around, you're looking at the floor. When you pass somebody in the hall, you're looking at the floor. When you're eating, you're looking down at your food. You can't journal during it. So I did exactly what they said. Like I could have brought a journal and they would have had no idea in my room, would have been fine. There's no they don't want you to do yoga. They don't want you to do stretching. It's either you're meditating, you're on a walk outside in this little quarter of an acre area that takes you 2 minutes to walk around, or you're just, taking a nap, or you're just staring at a wall, you're staring at the ceiling. And so for me, I realized that I'm a very calm person. My wife even says like, it's really hard to make me like, I don't really get offended. Nothing really bothers me at this point. Right. And day 7, I hated everybody. I'm like, not even kidding. Like it was full on rage. And, can I cuss on this podcast?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I remember I was sitting there, and it was the morning meditation. It starts at 4:00 in the morning. You got to get up at 4:00 in the morning. You go to the meditation spot. And I was so sore. Like I was like moving and it was just like everything ached in me. And it was that moment of like, why am I here? Like, this is stupid. I've got a business I'm running. I'm gone for 10 days. I can't talk with anybody. My cell phone is off. They have my cell phone. They turn it off and give them your cell phone. And I was like, this is stupid. And then I was like, this rage came out of me on day 7. And in my head, I was cussing out every single person. I was like, fuck this thing. Fuck this guy that's on stage. And then I sat down, I went to breakfast, and I was like, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. This guy sat down next to me, like in front of me on the other side of the table. And I was just like, in my head, verbally assaulting this guy. And I was like, you know what? I could leave, but I don't really give up on things. So I'm just going to keep on going. I was like, I'll go to the next meditation. I went to the next meditation, and I was just in so much pain. It was just cussing and cussing and cussing. It was like an hour and a half of just rage that was inside of my head. And I was like, I'm not leaving. I'm not going to leave. I signed up. I told myself I'm going to do this. There's a reason why I'm here. I'm going to trust there's a reason why I'm here. And the next meditation after that one was like pure bliss. Wow. And it was really weird. It was like, I was sitting there. The only reason why I got up was because I had to go to the bathroom. So it's like you have an hour-long session, then you can leave and go wherever you want to. And I sat there for like 2.5 hours in the exact same spot. And I was actually I felt so good doing absolutely nothing that I was sitting there in meditation crying. Because I was like, I've never felt this much joy in my entire life by doing nothing. And that was day 7. The night of day 7 is finally when that hit. Because everybody says, they're like, oh my God, 10 days. I could do like 2 or 3. I could do a weekend. But it took me 7 days to get to that point where I'm like, no, there's proof in the pudding. Like you have to get to that point. And for me, it was like, I've never felt, to this day, I still don't know if I felt that much joy. Like I was even thinking about this morning, I was like, I think I'm going to go back and do it again. Because I just think it's like a hard reset, computer isn't working, just turn it off, turn it back on. And that's kind of what I use. I see it as. It's just like hard reset. Like I've got a whole lot of stuff going on. Business is going really well, but we're hiring people and things are going. We got the book coming out. We've got events we're starting to do. So we have all of these new things. I'm switching over to a new platform with SiriusXM, and all of this stuff's just happening where I'm like, all right, in the next few months, I'm going to go do a hard reset again. And just kind of, it's been 6 years since I did it last. 5 years. I did in 2018. And I was like, I'm just going to do it again. And so for me, it was like, that was the main thing that I learned is like, even though it's not there, there's still stuff there that I need to work through. And that there's joy in doing nothing. I think it's a natural state of a human, but I think our programming is what has actually gotten us out of that natural state of joy.
What do you think that actually was when you went from the fuck you to the joy? What happened there?
I think it was, I stopped resisting. I think that we're resisting I've been saying this a lot lately, is that there are no problems that people have. There's only problems that we create. And so we could look at, for instance, I have someone who's in one of my courses, and she's got issues with her parents. They don't have any boundaries with her. They're very negative, the way they speak to themselves. They're constantly telling her about what, and I remember a few years ago, when she was in one of my programs, they were constantly telling her she didn't want to get a vaccine. They got a vaccine. And so there's a whole thing of them trying to tell her as an adult who she should be. And when you have that, it's like, okay, you've got your parents right here, right? But then that's some sort of constraint that you have. My parents are this way. But then what happens is we build another constraint, which is my parents should be different. And so now I'm fighting 2 different things, which in reality, it's just full on acceptance. And so I think what happened was, I came to the point of wanting to control everything and not getting what I wanted. I came to the point of not accepting that You're here for 10 days. You're going to be sore. There's going to be parts of you that you're going to have to let go of. And I think what I came up against was like the part of me that wants to control everything, the part of me that doesn't accept everything. And it was like, I'm here for 2.5 more days, 3 more days. I'm going to just allow this to just be a time where I sit here and I work on myself, and whatever happens, happens. And once I got to that point, and it was like, it's not about trying to take the rage out of me. It's more of accepting and integrating the rage. And that's what I think a lot of people have trouble with, is that we identify parts of ourselves. Like, one of the things I say is like, I hate that I judge people, right? So like, I've hated it for so long. I was literally parking out there and a guy walked past me and I noticed myself judge him. And I was like, man, I literally said it out loud to myself. I was like, what the fuck is going on? Like, it's still there. And I've come to accept now that it's like, it's probably not going to go away ever. I don't think in this lifetime I'll get to a point where I'm like fully enlightened and like one with God. Maybe I do. That'd be awesome if I did. But it's more of acceptance of like, yeah, this is who you are. You know, and this is the more that you don't resist those things, the less they have power over you. And the more you learn to like, okay, that judgment or that rage was a defense mechanism at some point in time in my childhood, and it served its purpose, and it has been built inside of me. And I probably won't completely get away from it. You know, if it's got like 75% control over me, maybe in 20 years, it'll have like 5% control over me. But the less that I try to control it and I try to be I don't accept that thing. The more that I don't accept it, the more that it slowly starts to just release me from it. And so I think that for me, it was just like, I wasn't accepting and I was trying to control. And I've had a lot of experiences where, you know, control was an issue for me. I had a experience back in 2017 where I realized that control was an issue for me. And I realized that, that if I can almost control nothing. Right? I can't control what you do. I can't control if the power goes off here. I can almost control nothing. Like a joke I would say, like, I can barely control like my bowels after Taco Tuesday. Like, who thinks that I could try to control the universe? It's ridiculous. And so what I've tried to do is just try to like fully accept more of like, you've got very few things that you can control. Just learn to be a little bit more. And when I resist something, that thing will persist, you know, and it'll get stronger. And the less I resist that thing, the less it's going to have control over me.
So much wisdom in what you just said. How do you deal then at 15 years old, your dad dying, and you can't control that, and now you don't have a dad anymore? What was that situation like, and how did you know it? Do you think that's why the control mechanism began, or what happened there, and how did you interface with that? Yeah,
I think the control started before then. So I think that, you know, the experience that I had in like 2017 was I realized that I had a control problem and that it was going to ruin all of my relationships forever, because I can barely control myself, let alone control other people. And if I'm trying to control other people, it's going to cause resistance in a relationship. And so I think it came from my childhood, because I started thinking about it. I was like, okay, if I look at my entire childhood, why would I have a control problem? And I looked at it and I was like, well, if I were to put a word over my entire childhood, having an alcoholic father, the word would be uncertainty. Like, I didn't know. I always tell people I was really grateful that I got and really lucky that I got the alcoholic father that I did. He didn't beat me. He didn't yell at me. He didn't touch me inappropriately. He just got drunk and he would fall asleep. Like, that's the dad that I had. Because of that, though, there was times when he was supposed to pick me up to go to baseball practice and he would just not show up. There were times when, you know, he would say, you know, call me up and say, hey, tomorrow I'm going to take you fishing. And I'd sit out on the steps and I'd just sit there with a fishing pole and he would just never show up. And so I think what happened was, with uncertainty, what happens with uncertainty is then you start going, well, I'm going to need to start controlling things, because I can't trust other people. If I can't trust my father to do what he says he's going to do, I can't trust anybody to do what they're supposed to do. And so what happened was, if I look over my entire childhood of being uncertainty, being the word that I would place over it, naturally it makes sense that I would try to control things as I got older. And it worked for me for a while. Like, when I started my first business, controlling everything was great. But then that turns into micromanaging. People don't like being controlled. As much as I don't like being controlled, other people don't like being controlled as well. And so if I'm micromanaging people and trying to make sure they're doing exactly what they're supposed to, what I want them to be doing, and they should be switching what they're doing so that it appeases me, it turns into a problem. And so I think that I don't know where it started in my childhood, but if I were to put a whole idea of, it's like, okay, 10,000 foot overview, you're looking down, childhood was uncertainty. Why would you develop control problems over uncertainty? Well, because I was trying to control the situation to make certainty. but humans are just going to naturally bring variables. There's just things that I can't control in that. And so for me, I think that's the biggest thing for me is like uncertainty was a childhood. It was omnipresent in my childhood. And with it being omnipresent, it was like, well, then I'm going to control everything and I'm going to get the way that I want it to be. But that will screw up every single relationship that you have if you try to control other people. So for me, it's been like a process of like taking a step back, and just giving people their space to be who they are. And instead of trying to control and change them, how can I try to love and appreciate them? Because usually when you love and appreciate people, their better qualities come out in the first place. And so that's been a lifelong thing that I've been working on since finding that.
Talk to me about trying to speak at an AA meeting after your father passed away.
Yeah. So for me, I'm very much an introvert, which is crazy because I guess it's really not that crazy because majority of the time I'm literally sitting in a room by myself talking in the podcast. So that's my way of getting my word out there. But I'm a very big introvert. And I remember, for anyone who doesn't know my story, my father passed away when I was 15. My dad was an alcoholic. He passed away when I was 15. I think it was accelerated. I've started to kind of dive into like, man, he passed away really fast because there's some people that are like alcoholics for like 30 years. What happened though is he did construction sales and he injured his back. So he started having to take medication. So I think the medication actually, he probably became addicted to the medication. That medication with alcohol probably took his liver out a lot quicker. And so what happened was, I remember specifically where I was in, it was my dad passed away on November 1st, 2001. My sister's 21st birthday was November 24th, 2001. And so it's 23 days later. And my family was never really great at communication. So we didn't talk a whole lot about it. It was just like a thing that happened. And then I kind of went back to school and all that. And so we went to Olive Garden in Sarasota for my sister's birthday, my mom, my sister, and I. And I had my permit. I was 15 years old, so I was driving. And we were at Proctor and 41. There's an Olive Garden that's right there in Sarasota, if there's anybody who's in Sarasota. I was sitting there, and I was driving, and I remember my mom asked a question. I was driving. My mom was next to me. My sister was behind her. My mom said, she said, so what do you guys think about your father's death? Like, it's been 3 weeks now. Like, what are you guys thinking? And I remember specifically I said to my mom, I think that if Dad knew how much good is going to come from this, he would be okay with dying. And that was like, came out of me. And I was like, I don't know who this kid is. Like looking back at 37 years old and looking at a 15-year-old, I'm like, I don't know where it came from. And so I remember thinking about, I was like, how can I take this, which is the worst thing that's ever happened to me, and make it the best thing that's ever happened to me? And so the first thing I thought in my head was like, man, if I went to AA meetings and the people who are alcoholics could see what happens to a child of an alcoholic, maybe it would help them. Like maybe they would wake up, right? And I was like, oh, that'd be awesome. So I had this idea. I came to my mom and she's like, cool, let me see what I can do. So we tried, and then we ended up finding out that you can't go to an AA meeting unless you're an alcoholic, which I understand, but it's also kind of crazy when you actually think of like a child could come in and say something that might change someone's life. And so I was kind of like, oh, that sucks. I don't know what I'm going to do. But when my father passed away, it was like my mission in life is to make sure that something good comes from this. And that's the only reason why I do what I do now. Because I know I was given traumas in my life to figure out how to work through them so I could teach other people how to work through them as well. So that happened when I was 15. Nothing really happened between 15 and 19. And then at 19, I started with a sales company called Cutco. I started selling knives in people's houses. And the thing that they're really hardcore on is personal development. Going to conferences, investing in a mentor, speaking. And so what happened was they promote very quickly. And about 6 months into it, I was put on stage. They made me start talking in front of people. I had to learn public speaking skills, all of this. And I was like, oh, this is the place. Like, this is the thing. And it had nothing to do with the knives and nothing to do with any of that. It had everything to do with, I'm working on myself, I'm improving myself, and I can see how these improvements are changing my life. What if they started helping everybody else's life as well? And so, started working my way through the ranks of the company. I had an office that I ran I was 23 when I opened the office in Fort Lauderdale. So I ran all of Broward County. And my whole thing was, I'm going to create an environment where, sure, people sell knives, but I'm going to create an environment where I can teach them what's helped me in my life. I thought maybe I should be a therapist. Maybe I should go to school for that, but I hate school. So that didn't really work out. And I found out like all sales is psychology and all managing people is also psychology. And so what I liked most about it was getting on my little stage in my office And it was every Wednesday we'd have team meetings, every Sunday we'd have team meetings, and just teaching them what was good and what helped me in my life, and maybe it could help them in some sort of way with personal development. And the first time it really clicked of like, oh, this is the thing you're supposed to be doing, like not necessarily cut code, but just teaching people, was I had this guy named Richard. He was he comes from the worst part, like absolute worst part of Fort Lauderdale. It's a part like where cops don't even really drive through there. Like it's a bad part of town. And his father had passed away the year before. And Richard was he was 19 and I was 23 at the time. And his father had passed away. He was in a wheelchair and he choked, and his brother ended up finding him a couple days later, and he ended up passing away in his apartment. And Richard worked with me for about 2 years, but about 6 months in, he came in and he was like bawling, like just crying. And he's like, hey man, I know I'm not good yet. I know I'm not like as good as everyone else. I know I don't come from like the best part of town. He's like, but he showed up every single morning at 7 a.m. I had these optional meetings at 7 a.m. every single morning where you could just come in and I would teach. And that's all I did. 7 a.m. I would teach. And he showed up every freaking day. And he's 19 years old. 19-year-olds he had to wake up at 6. You know, like 19-year-olds don't do that. They want to party. And he said, man, I know I'm not the best yet, but I'm really committed. And I want to tell you, since my father passed away, you're the only person that's been a father figure to me since then. And I was like, oh shit, this is what I'm doing, is doing something in people's lives. And since then I've just had the bug, and I was like, I'm going to ride this till I die. Like, this is the thing I love to do. And clearly it's doing something in people's lives. So I'm just going to do it. And so a lot of people do things for money. And I won't say that I've never done something for money, but I've always just realized that money is a byproduct of the value that I give the world. And so I'm just going to give as much value as I possibly can. And I'm just going to ride it till the wheels fall off. And it's worked out so far. So I'm just going to keep on doing and keep on working on myself, and then teach what works for me, because I use myself as a guinea pig, to anybody else who wants to listen.
So it's a remarkable story about Richard. And there's also a story about Adam I'd love for you to share. And I'm also curious, like, what qualities or attributes do you think Richard and Adam had or saw in you that allowed them to be like, oh, this person is someone I want to spend time with?
Well, yeah. So Adam, it's funny. I was literally looking him up the other day. Like last week, I went back. My business partner was asking for like a photo of me a long time ago. So I was like, let me go look for my Facebook. I haven't looked for my Facebook in forever. And I saw a picture of Adam. I looked at Adam and Richard, both of them together. Wow. Because I was like, I wonder where they are. I wonder what's going on with them and stuff. I haven't talked to either one of them in probably 2 or 3 years. And Richard is really high ranks in the Army. And so that's awesome that he's done that. And he's found like that's his place. Adam, he was this amazing guy who was very sheltered. And he, for me and everybody else on the team, like I knew he was gay. I didn't care at all. It didn't mean anything to me. But Adam comes from a really, really devout Muslim family, to the point where he used to keep his prayer rug in my desk in my office. And every day at those certain times, I would walk out knowing and just let him use my office so he could pray. Because I just respect anybody who wants to be devout to anything, whether that's religion or anything else. And I'm like, I'm not going to tell him my thoughts on this. But because of that, he was afraid of telling people of his sexuality. So he sat me down in my office, and he was really, really nervous. And this is probably about 1.5 years after working with me. And he's like, I want to tell you something. I was like, okay. And he's like, well, he couldn't get it out. And it wasn't coming out. And I was like, hey man, like whatever you want to say, it won't change my perception of you. I accept you exactly as it is. I could tell what was going to happen, And he's like, I just want to let you know that I'm gay. And I was like, I know. And he was like, really? And I was like, yeah, I've known since the moment I met you. And he was like very surprised that I knew. And I was like, why did it take 1.5 years to tell me? Like, I accept you for who you are, and your sexual preference is not going to change how I feel about you. And I was the very first person he ever told. And for me, that's also an honor, that he would trust me enough to do that. And then from there, I was able to, open up and tell his family and tell people in the office. And everyone accepted him as he was, but it was cool that I was the first person that he wanted to tell. And I think it was just because of the fact that like I've never wanted to seem special. I've never wanted to seem like what I do is only for me or for the elite or whatever it might be. I've never wanted to have that be somebody's perception of me. And so I think what made them specifically comfortable was that I'm looking at this guy. He's a flawed individual. He doesn't act like he's a guru. He doesn't act like he's perfect. He'll tell you he's fucked up in many different ways. He's just on a process of trying to improve himself. And he might be a little bit further ahead than I am, but we're on the same path and we're on the same journey. And so I think that if I were to guess, I think it's just the fact that they trusted that, you know, I was on the journey with them. I wasn't like some unattainable state that people can't get to. And so, those were two really great conversations back in 2009, 2010, that I think completely changed the trajectory of my life, where I was like, this is the thing I want to do. Because then after I left that company, I ended up working in other companies and doing sales and stuff. And I was like, this isn't fulfilling to me. This isn't what I want to do. And I want to go back to teaching people because that's where I feel the most alive. And the two of them reflecting that to me, I think is what really gave me a lot of courage to do it. Because I was like, I think this is what I'm supposed to do.
It's so funny because you describe yourself as judgmental, but in those two scenarios, you clearly weren't judging where they came from or what they were doing. And so what do you think about those two scenarios allowed you to act without judgment, whereas if you see someone on the street, you would?
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things where it's like, I know that the judgmental side of me is just something that's programmed into me for some sort of reason. It's some sort of protection mechanism and I don't know why it's there. But if I were to sit down and talk with somebody, there would never be any judgment towards that person. It's like the immediate thing that pops into my head. And so it's like, I always say you can't control your first thought, but you can always control your second thought.
Love that.
I still notice judgmental sides of me popping up all the time. And then I go, all right, you don't actually mean that. And so what I do is if I notice myself judge somebody, the first thing that I do as soon as I take myself out of the jar so I can read the label and I go, okay, I see what you're doing. I see this is protection mechanism. I see that you're judging people. I want you to tell me 3 things that are nice about this person. And in my head, I'll actually make myself say 3 things specifically I like about somebody. I started this in Sedona. I remember I was in a grocery store and I don't forget a whole lot of things. Like I remember like everything of big moments in my life.
The Bluetooth.
Yeah. It's exactly. It's a guy with a Bluetooth. I was like, man, who the fuck is still using these? It wasn't like the little Bluetooth. It was like the old school ones if he's like a telemarketer. And he's ordering, you know, we're in Sedona and I'm in a grocery store and this guy's sitting there and he's on this Bluetooth that's like standing there. And like, it's a huge telemarketer when it like comes down to his face. And the first thing that comes in is like, what the fuck are you wearing? And like, that was the first thing that popped in my head. And I was like, come on, dude. I was like, you gotta stop judging people. I was like, all right, you're going to literally, he was in line in front of me to get at the deli. And I was like, you're going to say 3 things that you like about this guy. And I had to go through and I was like, all right, I've actually kind of really like this guy's shoes and he's communicating with the people and he's incredibly kind the way he's speaking to people. I was like, he seems like he's a kind person. And then whatever the third one was. And I was like, that's just become a practice of mine. I taught this to a client of mine a couple of years ago, and she had reflected this back to me as she noticed that she had a lot of judgment too. And so her thing was as soon as she would judge somebody, her immediate thing was to say, I love them. So she would be like, oh, this thing. She would say something about them, and then she'd say, but I love them. And that was like her way of like the second thought. Okay, I judged, but I'm going to love. Okay, I judged, but I'm going to love. She told me that she was at a restaurant. It's like, I don't know, 3 or 4 months after doing this. And this lady came up and she was giving her the food. And her first thought was, holy shit, this woman's huge, but I love her. And she noticed the I love her came in as automatic as the judgment did. And I was like, that's part of the thing that we're trying to reprogram in ourselves, which is, you know, if we notice a judgmental side come in or notice the anger, or notice the stress, or notice the frustration, we can't control always the first immediate reaction, but we can always control the second reaction, the second thought. And so for me, that's been my thing, where I saw a guy on the street just a little while ago and I was like, fuck, there it is again. It's still not gone. Okay, let me figure out something that I like about this guy. And then I forced myself to say it.
Related to this is the practice that you do with your wife, which is about, at the end of the day, giving your wife a compliment of what you appreciate about her, what you love about her. And I thought that was just a subtle little thing you do to each other. Where did that practice start? I
don't know. I remember, we've been doing it now since 2017 and we do it every single night.
Dude, that's a lot of compliments.
It's a lot of compliments. I know because because both of us like words of affirmation, but let's be real, not everybody's the best at words of affirmation all the time. And so we developed this practice of the very last thing we do before we go to bed is we say something we like about each other. We did it last night, and we do it every single night. It's like it doesn't feel complete until we've done that. And it's actually hard for me to fall asleep until we get to that point. And which is really interesting because sometimes, when you're in a relationship with somebody, sometimes, you'll get into an argument or something like that before we don't go to bed angry. Like it's just, we don't, I don't allow it to happen. And so there's times where I put my pride aside.
Control that. You're going to control to make sure that we don't go to bed angry.
Right. And at the same time, man, it's like, it's not making my ego right is not worth my relationship. And so for me, it's just, we just say one thing that we like about each other. And we've told this to so many other couples, and they're like, we started doing it and it's amazing. And so like, we'll get in bed and, sometimes we have a quick conversation before we go to bed, talk about things. And the very last thing we say is we say, what I like about you, or actually one of us will always say, so what do you like about me? That's actually how we start it. And so, it'll be quiet for a little while and then we'll start to notice we're falling asleep and we'll say, all right, well, what do you like about me? Oh, I like this thing. Oh, I like this thing. And then give each other a kiss when we go to bed. And so I don't remember where it came from. I think it was just because of the fact that we had a conversation of like, we're not as good as we want to be with words of affirmation. So how can we actually make it like the last thing that we do every single day? And it's stuck. It's been 6 years now. Yeah.
It's a beautiful practice. And I think most couples could benefit from
for sure
inserting it. I also want to talk about the conversation you had with your wife that had her break down in tears. Mm-hmm. And that was around masculinity and femininity.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Could you describe that story?
Yeah. So this is something that we're still working on. I want to create a podcast on it one day and go into it. But, there's every person has masculine sides and feminine sides, right? And it's not saying like male or female. Masculine could be like controlling, pushing, I have a lot of very great masculine qualities that I can use that can be very great in success or, pushing the podcast out there or getting onto a stage or whatever it might be. That's like just the going, trying to get success. Also like the masculine can be just very calm and all that, but the feminine can be very like allowing, soft, loving, complimenting. And we were going to get married. And I was like, we should rent, before our wedding, we should go and it was just myself and her got married and a friend that introduced us, married us. So it was just the three of us. There wasn't anybody else except for John. John was there, my videographer back here. John was the only other person that was there.
Wow.
Video type of thing. I know, right? So it was the four of us that were there on top of Mount Bonnell. And the weekend before I was like, hey, I'm going to rent an Airbnb on the lake and let's just go and let's just talk about like what we want to create, this life that we want to create. And, I noticed there was like resistance on her side on different things. And I was like, hey, I want to just tell you how I feel and see what you like and what you don't like. And I was like, going forward, we're talking about having kids and stuff like that. So it's like, there's going to be an aspect where you're probably going to have to step away from business and probably going to have to step away because we're going to have children. And I was like, I want to fully support you and I don't want you to ever have to worry about money. And there's no real reason for my wife to work. I'm lucky enough to have built a business where it's not necessary. She still wants to. She's still motivated. She still enjoys what she does. She's also a coach. She also works in my business and helps us with stuff there. And I said, I want to support you and I want you to feel like it's a safe place. And the thing that really made her break down was I said, if it's okay with you, I would like to feel like I lead the family in that way. And the thing that you're really good at that I would like your help with in the family is just to love. So like my best qualities, I think I'm a great leader. Her best qualities, I think she is like this abundance of love for everybody. And that's something that I'm trying to get better at. That's the skill set that I'm trying to build in myself, and so I brought that up and she just started like bawling. And she's like, I don't know why I'm crying. I don't know what it is. And then, about a week later, we had a conversation. She's like, I think it was like the masculine side of being programmed to think that I have to succeed just in society. Like what she had said was that, she didn't feel like society views being a mother as being successful. She didn't feel like she felt like she had to be a mother and have like $1 million business outside of it. That's what she was supposed to feel. And so she had that, and we had that was part of the conversation, but we had when she actually was crying in the beginning, but it took her some time to figure out what was coming up. And that was about a week later. We had the conversation where she's like, I want to step into that, but I can still notice a lot of internal resistance. She's like, I want to be that way because ultimately, that's always been my thing. The way that I've realized that the way that I love is by trying to provide a safe space, trying to be able to give us experiences that we could have never had we not built the business and gotten to where it is. But I don't want her to feel like, she can't be an incredible mother and she also has to have a multi-million-dollar business outside of it. And so our circumstance is different. I think everybody's relationship is different. Some people, they do have the means to do that. Some people, they don't have the means to do that. And I think it's really about establishing each person's role in the relationship. And we had never had like a roles conversation. Like based off of my strengths, based off of my weaknesses, what's my role in this relationship? Based off of your strengths and your weaknesses, what's your role in the relationship? And that was, we got those two words down. Like based off of our relationship, once again, it's not perfect for everybody. Based off of our relationship, my spot is to lead and provide a safe space for the entire family. And the more that I can provide that, the more it opens her up to feel safe to be able to just focus on love, which then allows me to feel like, oh, I have a safe space because I can come home and it's safe. And when we have children, they feel like they're taken care of because she's definitely better at that than I am. Like that is 100% a skill set of hers, of something that I'm trying to learn from her. And I'm just thinking about like, what type of space do I want to create for our children? And both of us together worked as this in a team. And that was, I want a space where our children don't have to worry about security as far as like physical and financial security, because I remember having that as a kid. And I also don't want them to feel like they don't have emotional security. And how can we as a team make sure we provide that space for our children?
Yeah, it's beautiful. And it's funny too that you asked Tony Robbins right after this conversation happens. Yeah. You ask him on an interview that you did, like, what have you seen that's worked in your relationship? And he's like, understanding the masculine and feminine.
He said the same thing. And this is like a week after our conversation. Yeah, he said the exact same thing. He said, it was understanding that, if I remember correctly, it was understanding that polarity needs to stay in the relationship, which is the masculine and feminine polarity. Because sometimes if one person steps too much, if both of them in the relationship are too much of their masculine, then it's like, well, who's leading it? And then they kind of butt heads. If both of them are in their feminine, it feels like sometimes like, well, is this a safe place? Because we can talk about our emotions and stuff, but it's also like we have to pay bills. So we're humans are interesting, man. Like we live in a society where we do have to pay our bills. We can't just act like we don't need jobs, and that doesn't provide any safety. When you're not able to pay your bills, that's one of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is in there. But so is love is in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so how can we work together to make sure that what am I best at? Okay, I know a few things that I'm best at. What am I terrible at? I know quite a few things that I'm terrible at. What are you best at? Okay, you're best with this thing. Okay, what are you not good at? Okay, and we can work on those things and say, well, how can I step in a certain role in this relationship to help you on your strengths to get better? Maybe step in where I'm strong and you're weak, and I can provide that strength in that place, and vice versa. Because there's things that I'm really good at, she's not. There's things that she's really good at that I'm not. And then, about a week later, we literally had that conversation. He was on my podcast, and I was like, what's your number one tip? We just got married. What's your number one tip? And he was like, maintain polarity of masculine and feminine. And I was like, holy shit. Okay, that was good.
Have you seen that has entered the cultural conversation today more than ever before?
Yeah.
It feels that way, right?
Yeah. And it's hard because I think that it's not, we talk about equality, and I think equality is important, and everybody should have equal rights to everything all of the time. There should be no reason based off of someone's sex or where they're from or their religion or their skin color, they should have less of an opportunity than another person. I don't think there should never be that. But there's also, what's programmed into us in society of like, but this is only what success looks like. And success is almost always attached to fame or money in some sort of way. And what I had told Lauren was, I was like, listen, like, I think that being a mother is probably way harder than what I do. Like it's got to be way harder. Like that's a full-time job times 3. And so it's like, I think that society's problem is that we don't view being an incredible parent as an ultimate success, or raising incredible children as an ultimate success. Like, I know a lot of people who are really rich and they have terrible relationships with their children. They have terrible children. I don't think that's a success at all. You know? I know someone who's worth multiple billions of dollars and his children resent him. And it's like, that's not a success. Okay, he's got a bunch of shit that he can buy and houses and cars and planes and all that stuff, but I don't view him as successful in that way. And so I think that it's a conversation that people are starting to step more into. I think they're becoming more aware of it. I think there's resistance because they think that it means not equality. I think that there's equality, and then which is equality in society, but I think there's also balance in a relationship. I also have, just FYI too, just talking about this, like I have friends that I'm friends with who have incredible marriages, and the woman is more masculine and the man is more feminine, but that it works perfectly for them. I know two of my really good friends have that exact same situation. Laura and I are the exact opposite of that. I'm definitely more in the masculine. She's definitely more in the feminine. But I have 2 friends specifically, and I literally had this conversation last week with one of them, where she was talking about her, she was in a conversation with her, her fiance, and she was talking about how he just is overly dramatic in everything when he talks. And she's talking about all of these different things. And I was like, man, he's got really feminine qualities. And she goes, I know I'm basically like the man in the relationship, but that's what feels comfortable for me. And it's not really like the man in the relationship or the woman in the relationship. It's just she's more masculine, he's more feminine, and they work really well together, like really, really well. And I have another friend who, both of them are in their 50s, and that's the exact same thing. He's way more feminine, she's way more masculine, but they have this really good balance of like when to turn it on, when to turn it off, how to work with each other. And I don't think there's like an all, one size fits all or anything like that. I think it's just about realizing who you are, who the person in your relationship is that you're with, and then what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses, and how can you develop a team, which is really what a relationship should be. How can you develop a team to make sure that you create the life that you want to?
Very, very well said. One person who is a success, at least by your eyes at the time that you recorded the podcast, was this guy named Todd. Mm-hmm. And I'd love for you to tell a story about Todd that makes him such a remarkable human being. The one that stuck out to me was when he stops at a light to give lunch to a homeless man. Oh,
Ta. Yes. Okay, I was like, I thought you said Todd. Okay, yeah. Ta is incredible as a human, and a really good mentor for me. I remember the first time I had a conversation with him. He's super interesting. So this guy, just to give you background on him, he is a real good friend of mine. He's 51, 52 at this point, and he's from Brooklyn. He was a nurse for like 25 years in Brooklyn. He has seen the craziest of things because he worked in the ER as a nurse in Brooklyn. And he just like loves people more than any person I've ever, like he is such an inspiration to me in this way, where he is a perfect example of like the perfect, I don't want to say perfect, a near perfect masculine and feminine in a man, where it's like when he needs to be masculine, he could turn it on and he can be that way. But his natural state is a little bit more feminine. It is way more loving. And I remember I had a conversation with him one time, and Ram Dass talks about this, and he talks about like opening your heart to people. And he says, if we were all to open up our heart, there would be no homeless people because we just invite them into our house. And the problem is we don't allow ourselves to like fully open up our hearts. We close them as a protection mechanism. And I understand, obviously, there's safety that's in there. But the first conversation I had with Todd, we were talking, I don't even know how we started talking about it. And he goes, yeah, man, one of the things that I like to do, like to give you an idea of, last thing I'll say about it before I tell you the story, is he's really good at like connecting and you feel seen by him. There's no ulterior motives. It's like he's there, he's present, everything. And he said, yeah, man, we started talking about homeless people because homeless population was getting like, it was right around 2019, 2020, where it really started to ramp up with all the stuff that was happening. And he goes, yeah. He goes, I just really love people. He goes, you want to know one of my favorite things to do? And I was like, yeah. He goes, I'll go to a stoplight when I see a homeless person, and I'll give them money, and I'll say, how are you? And they're usually like, oh, I'm good. And he's like, he looks me in the eye and he goes, no. How are you? And they're like, well, they start to open up a little bit more to him. And he goes, hey man, do you need a hug? And a lot of times they'll say yes. And so he gets out of his car at a stoplight with people behind them and gives them a hug. And he goes, I understand in society, that's not what we're supposed to do. There's people that have to be somewhere. They have to be there on time. But the thing that I think for me is having somebody see a random person that doesn't know this guy on the side of the road, get out and give them a hug, no matter what they look like, no matter what they smell like, no matter what it is. He goes, what I want to do is I just want to give that person love. And then after that, I'll always ask him, I'll say, are you hungry? And if they say yes, I'll go, do you want to go get some lunch? And he will literally, like 50% of the time they say yes, he'll just put them in their car with them. They'll go get some lunch and he'll just get to know them. And that's like literally just the guy's heart. That's how he is. And so, he's one of the people I'm trying to work to be more like in that way, where it's like, I have that side of me, but I'm trying to develop that side of me, And so, he's a good mentor in that aspect for me.
Where do you get that from?
Well, I mean, he's seen so much. Like his life story is just insane. All the stuff that he's seen, all the stuff that he's been through. He's had people die in front of him and tell them stuff that he said what's really interesting is he would have people come in and say something like they cheated on their wife and he's the only person in the world that knows right before they die. And so with seeing as many people go through as many things as they have over 25 years of being a nurse in Brooklyn and Manhattan and all of these places, I think he just realized that people just need more love and they just want to be accepted more. And I think that he's seen that with a lot of people that were drug addicts that would come in, and he'd see them come in and overdose over and over again. And it was like, the thing that's missing is love. And so I think that in himself, he just developed that skill. I think he's, knowing his life story that wasn't always there from all the stuff he's told me. And yeah, I think if I were to guess, it's probably where he grew up and not a good part of town, what he's seen, and understanding that people just want to be loved, and he's just trying to be this vessel of love that just gives it to whoever he feels actually needs it.
Yeah, I would love to meet him, to learn more about him.
He's amazing.
Where do you think you currently need more love for yourself in your own life?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like life goes in seasons. I'm in this season right now of hardcore expansion, right? So it's really interesting where it's everything is happening right now for me. The book is just something that's happening, but there's a million other things that are happening. It's all good. It's all good stuff. But the thing that I need the most love with, and I'm starting to, and I communicated this with my wife over this past week, was I was like, as soon as we're done with this moment of the next 6 to 8 weeks, we're going on vacation. So I already bought tickets to go to Mexico last night.
Nice.
I was like, we're going to vacation. I'm putting my phone away. I'm not going to have it. I'm going to develop a plan so that everything runs while I'm gone. We'll be great. But I think that for me, it's not I would say in the past, it used to be accepting who I am. That's where the love is needed. For me, it's understanding the season of life that I'm in right now is not the season of life that it's always going to be. I've had this I would say this operating system since I was younger of just go to succeed, to make things what I wanted them to be. And it works for a while until it doesn't, because everybody burns out at some point in time. But the thing is for me is noticing what season that I'm in. And so I had the conversation last week. It was actually this weekend, I think, with my wife, where I was I'd sat down on Friday. It was 6:00 and at 6:30, I was doing all these things. She had said something to me and I was texting back because I was just trying to close out the day. And she said something, I completely missed it. And I was like, yeah, okay. All right. And I got done texting and I go, neat. And she goes, what? And I was like, hold on, let me catch up to where I am. And she was like, take a breather for a second. And I was like, all right, cool. And so for me, it's the aspect of love, I think, is just giving myself space to like be and not do all of the time. Like we're human beings, not human doings. I've been very wrapped up in my life in a lot of different places of human doing. But for me, it's like planning out and looking at my schedule, say, okay, some seasons are expansion, some seasons are contraction, right? If you look at my yard right now, my yard is like dead because it's 110 degrees every single day. Like it's like yellow grass, right? I tried to keep it alive by watering it. Didn't work. Well, there's just a season of life that my grass is in right now of contraction. That's just the way that it goes. It's happened last summer as well. Spring is about, or the fall is going to be here. Stuff is going to start to grow again. Summer's going to be over. We're going to go into fall. Things are going to start to grow. They're going to go through their seasons. Then we're going to go into winter, and winter is going to be contraction again. And then we're going to get spring, and spring is going to be expansion again. And it's like these seasons. And so for me, it's like knowing that things are not always going to be the way that they are. When I get this moment of I have an opportunity to put my pedal to the metal and just really going at it, but giving myself grace while going through it and realizing like if it doesn't always have to be this way. I don't have to be go through October and November and December and January. And so it's like allowing myself to have my strength of like, I can go hardcore. I have like a motor that can just keep going, but motors can't run forever. So the love that I need is like, all right, after we're done with this season, we're going to take a step back. We're going to reset. The 10-day silent meditation retreat. That's another example of it, of like giving myself space to like hard reset, then go back in and do it for a little while and then hard reset and go back in. And so for me, it's like giving myself space and grace that like I'm going to fuck up many times over the next 6 weeks, 8 weeks of launching everything, but it's just the way that it goes and it works out perfectly.
So what you're talking about is you're going to go on this book tour of all these podcast appearances, speaking opportunities, traveling all over the place. And like, you know, you start it right here, but then it'll expand into different places. And I'm curious, there are people who are listening right now who are entering into that season themselves right before the holidays. Yeah. And I'm curious what practices you're leaning on in this time.
Well, I mean, for me, like I don't miss meditation in the morning. So like for me is I don't allow myself to go into my day without focusing on me first, which I did incorrectly for years. And for me, like this morning, I woke up earlier than Lauren. Normally we meditate together. She didn't wake up until later today because she wanted extra sleep. And so I just let that happen. So our dog, Bear, and I, we went outside and we sat by the pool and we just meditated this morning for like 30 minutes. And
is there a timer on that or is it just feel?
Yeah, well, so this morning it wasn't. If it's me by myself, there's usually not a time. If it's me and my wife, usually what we'll do is we'll go to the couch and I'll put on a YouTube meditation audio. So it's usually 20 or 30 minutes is what we do. There's some days though we only have 10 minutes, but it's not something that I ever skip. It's something I skipped for years. I do it twice a week, 3 times a week, whatever it is. But it's like something that I don't not do. Like I have to get it done. And so for me, it's just like before I go hardcore into my day, because I know just exactly how my mind works. You know, some people are less focused. For me, like when I get into like work mode, I'm on it and then I can turn off at 6 o'clock. And that's just the way that I run. And so the thing that I kind of allow myself to do is to have space in the morning. So every single morning, I have the exact same routine. I go into the kitchen. I get a 32-ounce glass of water. I put in electrolytes. I put in creatine. I put in vitamin B. I put in vitamin D because those are 2 things that years ago I was deficient in. So I have that I take. And then as soon as I get with that, I go to meditating. It's like there is nothing else that will get in the way. Even if I only have 10 minutes, I have to do it. And then after that, I'll read. And so, for me, I've been reading a lot of Ramakrishna, which is, I'm sorry, no, that was before. I'm a Krishnamurti is who I'm actually reading right now. And so I've read a lot of self-development books. I've read a lot of business books. And for me, it's like I'm actually reading a lot more spirituality books. And I'm hardcore into Krishnamurti right now just because I feel like the season of my life that I'm in, it allows me to like step back and get perspective. I tried it a few months ago I was reading some business books and it was like I would wake up and I would meditate and then my brain immediately go to business and then I would go into business and actually work on my business. And so for me, it's like I have a space where I drink my water, I do my meditation, I read, and then I work out. And that is like my space. And then after that, when I'm done, then I go straight into my work. But it's like I always focus on me first and filling my cup before I go out and try to, fill other people's cup.
Love that. Krishnamurti was one of Peter Crone's biggest influences, and one of my biggest influences, Peter Crone, as well. And I know you were coached by him, and I was curious. He's episode 378 of this podcast, but I'm curious for you, what did you learn either getting coached by him or when you're
so
what was that experience like?
He, in my opinion, is one of the best at seeing somebody's what's the best word for it? Because I don't want to say deficiencies.
Blind
it's not
spot?
They're blind spots.
Yeah.
They're allowing someone to see something that's inside of them really quickly. And so I was like, I got to learn from this guy in some sort of way. I tried to hire him one-on-one, but he doesn't do one-on-one really that much anymore. So I joined this little mastermind thing that he had. And I was like, I'm just going to learn everything that I possibly can. I'm just going to watch this guy coach. I want to watch what he does. And the thing that I learned most from him is, and I started reading Krishnamurti, and I was like, oh, that's where this is coming from. And it is the whole thing of like, there are really no problems. There's just the problems we create in our mind. And so it's like, when I say that, most people are like, but I got to pay my bills. Like they think that I get that. That's just a circumstance. It's really not a problem. A lot of times what happens is like, let's say somebody has a job and they get fired, and they think the problem is that they got fired. The problem is not that they got fired. The problem is that they're not accepting that they got fired so they can go find another job, right? So it's like we create these problems all the time. And so it's really funny because I've realized when I listen to him, I'm like, oh, he's just looking for, as Krishnamurti says, distortions to reality, where there's reality and then there's a story that we're putting on top of that reality. And when you take a step back and you start reading Krishnamurti, you're like, that's basically what he says, is that there's reality, and then we distort reality through our identity, our paradigm, our blueprint, whatever. There's all these different people and gurus that have different words for it, but really what it is our story that we're telling ourselves in our head is distorting reality. Where's the distortion, and what's that distortion causing for us? And so for me, I think that's the biggest thing that I got from it. I was like, man, it's actually a lot more simple than I thought it was. Because I've been coaching people for a very long time, and I can get really in depth and in the weeds. And then I just realized like, oh, sometimes you don't need to get in the weeds. Sometimes you just go, hey, the problem, like I said earlier, the problem's not like your parents not being what you want them to be. The problem is that you're resisting the way that your parents are, which is causing another problem. So instead of there being the problem of your parents, there's a problem of your parents, and there's a problem that you don't want your parents to be that way, and you want to try to fix them. Now there's two problems you have to overcome. And so for me, it's like, that's probably a thing that I think I was like, yeah, that one clicks. That makes the most sense for me with him.
How do we get better at recognizing that? You mentioned journaling before. Yeah. Talking to Peter Crone is also an amazing way to do that.
Well, yeah, for sure.
It's not available to everyone.
I mean, I think journaling and meditation is a good one. I think another one that's probably the best one that people don't do is actually asking for feedback from people that they're close to.
Yes.
Like actually talking with someone that you love and that you're close to and asking them like, hey, what am I not seeing? Like a SWOT analysis of yourself. So SWOT analysis, SWOT, for people who don't know, is strengths. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What are my opportunities? And what are my threats? And you go through and you ask somebody like, hey, what do you think? Like, go to your wife and say, hey, what do you think my strengths are? She tells you, and you gotta be ready for some shit. If you're gonna ask these questions, say, hey, listen, I want you to just give it to me. Don't judge. Take the feedback in. What are my strengths? You ask what your strengths are. You find that out. What are my weaknesses? You start finding out your weaknesses. What are my opportunities? And then what are my threats? What people I think will realize is they think they know themselves, but they don't actually truly know themselves. Like there's one thing that I've done at events that we run that's extremely vulnerable. And my events that I do is not just a whole lot of me teaching. It's like I'll teach for a little bit, and then there's journaling, and then there's breaking out and talking with other people. And there's different exercises to kind of see what's going on. And so one of the things that people do is we teach them how to do this and make sure that they're open to it first. They'll go into groups. So say we have 75 people like we did this, not this past weekend before, 75 people, and you'll go up to one person, open body, hands out, no restriction, none of that stuff. You can't put your arms in front of you, your hands are out to the side. And you look each other in the eye, you take a deep breath, and you say one of three things. One of them is, I trust you. The other one is, I don't trust you. The other one is, I don't know if I trust you. And people think that they're putting on this show for other people, but they don't realize that energetically the person's not getting it. they're not connecting. And so a lot of times we act like we're somebody else. We put on this facade of like, this is who I am. And we think that we're all good at it. And then when you sit in front of a couple people and a couple people are like, I don't trust you. You're like, what the fuck am I doing wrong? Like I thought, and you can realize that people energetically, it's not right. And a lot of times it's because we're trying to be someone that we're not. And so for me, I think feedback is probably one of the best things. I used to be really bad at feedback. I used to get really, my ego would flare up. But for me, it's like, I'll listen to somebody's feedback because perception is reality, and whatever they're perceiving of me is their reality. And so maybe it's in me, maybe it's in them. It's probably in both of us. And there's probably something that I could do to change so that we can have a better connection between myself and that other person.
What's coming up for me right now is, I really don't want to go to each one of my ex-girlfriends and have them give me a SWOT analysis.
Of course you don't. But it's the best thing you could do, right?
But that's where freedom is found, and the truth is found.
Of course, yes.
I like to end these podcasts with a challenge or ask the guests of a challenge to leave the audience with something. And so my challenge based on this conversation, I'm going to be doing a SWOT analysis and asking ex-girlfriends for that.
You're going to need to email me. Let me know how that goes. That's going to be rough. It's going to be, but that's the thing though, is it's going to be rough, but it's going to probably be the most eye-opening and enlightening thing you've ever had before.
Yeah, 1000%. And I'm curious what challenge you would leave the audience with, or someone listening, for an action step that they can take in their life to help them become the best version of themselves possible. No pressure.
Yeah. Try to see if you can start accepting yourself more. Like I think that for a lot of times, a lot of people, what we try to do is we try to change ourselves so much versus just accepting. It's kind of like we grab so tightly onto who we are that it reminds me of like the story of like the little girl who gets a rabbit, and they go to the store and her parents, they get her a rabbit, and then they have it in the box and they're taking it home, and she's like, well, I want to hold the rabbit. She's like, okay, you got to hold the rabbit, but watch how we're going to go around turns and stuff. She just loves this rabbit so much that she ends up just holding on to it, and they get home and she ends up actually accidentally killing the rabbit because she squeezes it too tight. And I think that so many of us are so attached to who we are or who we think that we are, that we just grab on so tight that we're just like killing our relationships. We're killing our perception of ourselves. And what I think we should do is, instead of going, okay, now I'm going to let go of this rabbit a little bit, but I don't like this person I've been for a long time. And I hate that I am this way. And I hate my judgment. And I hate my judgments. I hate my anger. I hate my sadness. I hate my frustration. I hate that I'm stressed out all the time. I hate my anxiety. Whatever it is that people have, is to just try it on for size of being like, okay, I'm anxious and I love myself still. And so what I would try to do is, if you have aspects of yourself that you want to change, I don't ever like using the words better, because if I can change my anxiety, I'll be better, because better implies worse, which automatically makes somebody think that they're worse right now. I don't want anyone to think that they're worse. I just want someone to understand that we're constantly evolving and there's another version of yourself. What would the version of yourself look like if you stopped trying to resist who you actually are and you just started accepting who you truly are? And then try to figure out a way to integrate that side of you. Because there's a benefit in everything. There's a benefit in stress. Like when you really need to get something done and stress turns on, it makes you way more productive. But if you're trying to fall asleep, stress is not what you need at this moment, right? There's a benefit to anger, because anger can protect you. But if your wife is trying to give you feedback on your SWOT analysis and you're yelling at her, it's not the right time to be angry. There's a benefit to sadness, because we all go through grief and we all go through different phases in our life where something happens, a relationship is gone, somebody's not in your life anymore, somebody dies. There's benefit to that, but there's not benefit in bringing that sadness a year after somebody passed away or somebody, let's say somebody broke up with you, and bringing that sadness of the relationship not being there a year down the road. And so I think that it's important for people to understand, I've been saying this a lot lately, is stop trying to change and start trying to integrate, because every aspect of yourself has a benefit. Anger is a tool that you can use at a certain time. If you have a nail, you need a hammer. Okay. Sometimes anger is what you need at that moment. Sometimes sadness is what you need at the moment. Sometimes stress is what you need at the moment. Sometimes happiness and joy, sometimes calm is what you need at the moment. And so I would say, if people stop trying to change and start trying to integrate, that would be my biggest challenge for people, is like, why don't you integrate every aspect of who you are and see if you can become once again, not better, a more evolved version of yourself by integrating all aspects of yourself.
Rob, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I'm excited to check out your new book, Level Up. Is there anywhere else you'd like to send people to connect with you further?
That's it. I mean, if somebody wants to read my book, it was a process. It was a lot bigger process than I thought it was. I was very ignorant to how much of an undertaking it would be. I wrote an entire book. I didn't like it. I threw it away and I wrote another book because I wanted a different one. So I went through 3 years and 16 rounds of edits on the book. I've put everything that I've learned as far as, how to take action for someone to create the life that they want to. And so that's what I created Level Up for. And the actual title Level Up comes from like a video game. And so the way I like to think of life is like a video game. And I see, every challenge. If you're playing a video, like if you go to the video game example, right? Like how boring would it be to have a video game where you're just on the same level, no challenges, none of that. It'd be the most boring game. You never play it the next day. But what makes the video game fun is that there's a new challenge with every level that you go to. There's a new bad guy. There's a new, and you try to beat this bad guy for a little while and you die a couple times. And that's the way that it works. But you get better because you start learning what works and what doesn't work. And then you beat the bad guy, you go into the next level and there's more challenges. And so the idea of Level Up came from every challenge that you have is going to make you better. And how can you actually start perceiving your life that way? And so for me, it's like when we look back to the whole thing that happened with my dad that was a massive challenge that happened in my life. But I used it as an opportunity to try to get better. Breakups, people dying, all of these things are challenges that I believe the universe gives us for us to just try to improve and try to grow. And so for people who are trying to grow in that way, Level Up, the book, I just wanted to create one thing that was from start to finish, like step by step, how to improve yourself. And it's not a self-help book. I didn't want to just write another self-help book. It's literally like a lot of science, neurology, facts of how to, studies of how to improve yourself and actually start to take action. And then besides that, I have a podcast that comes out, 4 times a week that's called The Mindset Mentor. So if someone wants to read the book, Level Up, they could Google it. It's going to be everywhere. Level Up Rob Dial is going to be all over the place. And then The Mindset Mentor is a podcast where I put out episodes 4 times a week for about 18 to 20 minutes on average.
Yeah, it's a great podcast. I highly recommend it. And both are linked down below as well as your Instagram. So thank you so much for taking the time, for your openness, for your willingness to share, for your ability to take your life experiences and reflect them back out into the world. It's really remarkable. So
thanks, man.
I really appreciate you for doing what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks for having me.